Well, speaking of authoritarianism, good transition, good all-purpose transition. Let me talk about another Republican, this time a judge, J. Harvey Wilkinson of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Obviously not an active Republican now, but appointed by Ronald Reagan, a well-known conservative jurist. This is part of what he wrote in his order, in his decision upholding the lower court decision on the Abrego-Garcia issue. The government is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims in essence that because it had rid itself of custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from courthouses still hold dear. Peter, so the judges are pushing back. I mean, maybe other people aren't, but contrast what's going on in the judiciary with what's going on in the Republican side of the Senate.
Yeah, in fact, what's really fascinating about the Abrego-Garcia case is that every judge who has heard this, from the district court all the way to the Supreme Court, liberal and conservative, has had the exact same response. I mean, there's some semantic differences in some of their rulings, but basically they're saying, you, the government, admit you screwed up and violated the law by sending this man to El Salvador, even though there was an order saying you shouldn't do it. Therefore, you have a responsibility to do something about it. And what Trump is basically saying is, no, I really don't. You know, I got nothing to do with this. Even though I have the president of El Salvador sitting next to me in the Oval Office, I have no idea how I could possibly convince the guy to give me the guy back.
And instead now they're launching essentially a character assassination against Abrego Garcia himself. Now, look, do we know if he has ties to MS-13 or not? They haven't presented new evidence. They're basing it on police reports from 2019 that did not charge him with any crime and a subsequent 2022 interaction with police where he was also, again, not charged with any crime. But Judge Wilkinson says this also in that opinion. He says, is he a member of MS-13? Perhaps, perhaps not. But if the government is so confident in their case, then they need to bring it through to the court of law. And bring him back.
And bring him back. And so that he can go through the due process. That's the whole point of due process, is you go through all of the points that you need to. The government and then the defense come together, they go back and forth, and then we figure out what actually happened and whether or not someone is a member of this gang or that gang or whatever.
Well, but also the essence of this, and I'd be shocked if this wasn't part of Donald Trump and the White House's calculation, is that the judiciary ultimately doesn't have an army at their disposal. They don't have any way to enforce their positions. I mean, they can, launch contempt proceedings and so forth. But ultimately, they see this as sort of an argument that will play out in a political spectacle that could benefit.
Let me go to this larger point, and let's start by I want to show you something that Judge Wilkinson said 12 years ago, speaking at Duke University. I want to show you that very interesting moment, and then I want to go to Donald Trump talking about judges. Let's play Wilkinson first.
When the tyrants of the 20th century, these monsters like Hitler and Stalin and Mao, wanted to take over society, chief among their targets is the rule of law. They don't want independent courts. And, this is a sacred trust that we have here, and there ought to be a reverence for the law as the law.
And now let's watch Donald Trump this week talking about judges as annoyances or impediments.
I was elected to get rid of those criminals, to get them out of our country, or to put them away, but to get them out of our country. And I don't see how judges can take that authority away from a president.
So the million-dollar question is, have we reached an emergency that you're alluding to?
Well, is this a constitutional crisis? I mean, to use the word. I mean, it seems like it. I mean, along with other things that could be getting into the neighborhood.
But isn't it only a constitutional crisis if the White House says, yes, we've read your ruling and we're not following it?
Sure.
It's pretty close to that now. Now,
how close?
They are making the argument, and this is a distinction, that they are in keeping with the Supreme Court's ruling as they interpret it. Mm-hmm. Now, it's a pretty strained interpretation because the Supreme Court says you shall facilitate the return of him. Well, we're facilitating. If he happens to show up on our border, we'll let him in. It's a spurious argument, most lawyers would say, but they're not saying that they're disobeying the court. They may come to that point next, though.
Well, you sort of wonder
again.
if at some point Justice Roberts or the court en masse, make some kind of very succinct statement about their position here, not open to interpretation, and just sort of take it from there.
Yeah.
You mean
there
bring
are-
him back and put him through the process?
I mean, the Supreme Court made pretty clear that the action that the administration took was against the law.
Right.
To deport all of these people without due process. It's against even the Alien Enemies Act, which is what they used to deport them. And so, there are many constitutional scholars who already say that we're in a separation of powers crisis, a rule of law crisis. I mean, Judge Wilkinson himself, in that opinion, said that maybe he's naive. He used the word naive to believe or have hope that the president will and that the executive branch will respect the rule of law and understand that it is vital to America. So he's already saying that he believes that the country, if it isn't, is on the precipice of a crisis.
Is there a chance that Justice Roberts and the Supreme Court are not writing it so clearly because they don't want to know what might happen? There's a little Murkowski quality maybe here.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't want to find out.
Well, because like the way that Donald Trump and his team works is they want, if you need them to do something, you have to say it, right? You can't kind of wink and nod at it. You can't do the gray area like you've done in the past with other presidents who say they respect the rule of law and are going to do what the Supreme Court says or do what a district court says. This is a group of people who, if you don't make it black and white, they're not going to do it. And that's what's happening when you're talking about their interpretation of it. They also believe in the unitary executive theory, that they have more power than other presidents have both exercised and believed that they've had in the past.
But I think to your point, and what Mark's point is, because these judges are wary of the conflict. They're really being careful, trying not to provoke a situation where they are basically ignored. Because what is the credibility of the courts?
Well, then
That happens. And you saw Judge Boasberg, for instance, says, I'm going to have a hearing on whether you've committed contempt in this other case, for instance. It's pretty clear they did. It seems like you could most judges would have said, you're in contempt, period. He's trying to say, I'm giving you a chance to tell me how you're not, and we can get out of this.
A kid or a puppy.
He's trying to say, don't push me, but at some point, they have to make a decision.
I have to ask the question then, what happens the day after they actively ignore a clearly written order?
We're in a constitutional crisis and then nothing happens.
Yeah, what happened?
There's no army.
Well, they would be found in contempt. Potentially criminal contempt, but to your point earlier, they don't.
Justice Department going to prosecute
I guess
Trump.
right, and then but then I guess there would be some Supreme Court version of the Boasberg statement, sort of go up the ladder. I mean, I guess they can probably threaten contempt and maybe future disbarment or lawyers who work on this case in the government. I don't know. I'm just
You
sort of
can
throwing
also
that out
level
there.
financial penalties against specific government officials if the judges are able to figure out which government officials violated their order. And you see that Boasberg is kind of heading down that path right now. But again, yes, Justice Department in many of these situations would be in charge of enforcing any of the judges' orders.
I'm trying to deduce what the Supreme Court is doing and might do, but you all cover the White House. Does this White House want an open confrontation with the Supreme Court where that question is put on the table in front of the American
I don't think
people?
the Supreme Court would engage in such a thing, or at least in a way that would be, I don't know, that would be obvious, or that would actually put them in contrast. I mean, I disagree a little bit.
Does Donald Trump want a confrontation with the Supreme Court?
He probably doesn't, I would guess, partly because he sees them maybe as an ally.
What are they telling you inside?
I think they do want a confrontation, or they want certain things to be brought fully to the Supreme Court, whether it's birthright citizenship, which we're seeing the Supreme Court deciding that they're going to take up, or they want to reverse the Impoundment Act, which makes it so the president can claw back a bunch of money when he decides, I don't want to spend federal funds. I think they want those confrontations because they're hopeful, maybe not that they'll clash with the Supreme Court, but that the Supreme Court will rule in their favor.
I think they want a conflict, particularly on this immigration case, for instance, because they think it's a political winner, right? They could have made this go away. They could have brought the guy back from El Salvador and still deported him under a different process that would have been seen as legal by the courts, presumably. But they didn't do that. Why did they not do that? Because they like the idea of saying, you guys are defending rule of law, you're defending bad guys who are members of gangs and thugs and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Two more issues I want to get to. The first, Eugene, sorry, but you're the head of the press in America. You're the president of the White House Correspondents Association. We're not going to talk about the White House Correspondents' dinner, but you are one of the people leading the charge to make sure that the press has autonomy and freedom to cover the White House. What's the state of play?
I think the state of play is not great. If I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be like Lisa Murkowski and be honest here. Part of the reason is because you have in the White House folks who believe that the people who are doing the governing should also pick who's covering them, right? In the past, even during his first term, Donald Trump believed that, or at least allowed, that the people doing the covering picked who did the who covered them. And I think the reason is because you don't want government officials to be able to have viewpoint discriminations like we've seen with the Associated Press, them choosing people who are going to bring into the Oval Office, who are going to ask easy questions, who aren't going to push back on it.
And the press and the White House, going back to the 60s, to the television era, the beginning of the television era, just accepted that these are the norms.
Yeah, and there's always been tension, right? I tussled with the Biden folks on many a phone call, right? That part of it is normal, right? Even with the WHCA and the White House. The difference is that the kind of ham-handedness of we're going to control this because, and frankly, lying and saying, the WHCA has been closed off and hasn't brought in people. We have brought in a place that both of us used to work at, Political, a digital outlet, the Daily Caller, right? Christian Broadcast News, all these different types of organizations who are members of the association, good members of the association, and have gotten chances to and have continued to be in the pools and all of that. So we're in a position right now where we are ready at any time to continue to take over the pool and do all of that, because it's not about us. It's to make sure that the American people have people in the Oval Office who are asking questions, who aren't asking easy questions, who are pushing the president to defend the things that he wants to do in this country.
Right. It will come back to this because this is going to be going on and on and on and on, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Peter, one last question for you. I want to stay on the subject of the Chris Krebs. Ran for Homeland Security in the Biden period, an organization that looked at disinformation campaigns. Now is being targeted by the Trump administration, and part of the EO directed against him, the executive order directed against him, blamed him, said that one of the reasons he is unqualified to even hold a security clearance is that he argues that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. He's had to now leave his job in the private sector because of this kind of pressure campaign.
Yes.
What does it mean for the health of our democracy that this is going on?
It says a lot. Chris Krebs, of course, worked actually under the Trump administration, was fired by Trump when he said at the end of the 2020 election there was no evidence that the election was in any way unfair or rigged. And you're right, this executive order, which directly targets him by name. I've never seen any president ever, until this one, sign executive orders targeting people he did not like by name, saying the Justice Department should investigate this person. And you're right, to say the Justice Department should investigate Chris Krebs because he refuses to accept that the 2020 election was rigged. In other words, my version of reality, what the president's saying, he should be investigated. In effect, he's saying it's a crime to say the 2020 election wasn't rigged.
So that's straight Orwell territory.
It's pretty up there.
That we're in.
It's a crime to tell the truth, is what he's saying.
Well, we are going to have to leave it there. Thanks to our guests for joining me, and thank you at home for watching us.